Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. This time we'll be looking at the Familial Festivities banner. I'm actually getting back into the swing of things, so I suppose the GHB/Tempestral banner review should be out a lot sooner than what I thought I would release it, but we'll see. This banner is kind of a mess. I don't mean a mess as in, like, it's a bad banner, but I'm saying a mess as in, Fur was intended to be a sword unit, but is now an axe unit. In case you don't believe me, by the way, here's a screenshot. Taken from the website itself that introduces heroes. Look at the URL for Fur's image. Fur, Sword of Spring. Yeah, that sounds like an axe unit to me. Yep, sure. Also felt like Bartray was meant to be a Lance Infantry unit, which should have been the first one added to an easy-to-access pool, and not at all, you know, seasonal. Looking at you, Berkut, or Duo, looking at you, Ephraim. Since Shiro... which, by the way, would have helped tremendously for Bartray. Also felt like Norson should have been an axe unit. Because, you know, you don't always stab with a fork, you can also cut food with it. I don't know why I have to mention this, but yeah. I feel like if he had been an axe unit with this stat line, though, the chances of making an axe unit stand out would be borderline impossible unless you would get something like Eve's stat line but with IVs. So that was a good decision on their part for the longevity of the game and the health of the game. As for Idun, I feel like her color makes sense, but she could have been a different color. I think the reason why Fur was moved from red to green was purely for the simple fact that she would have shared focus with Idun. But, you know, I feel like she would have been maybe better as a different color, because base Idun is gonna be one hell of a comparison. As far as the banner is concerned, before we actually get to the units, I do want to point out one thing. This is very rare, I'll say this, but none of the units here are bad, nor are they absolutely amazing. At best, I would say, I guess the best unit would be an 8 out of 10, and the worst unit would be a 7.5 out of 10. There's not much of a gap between each unit. In fact, just ranking them, I probably would change the placement where I would put the units, just because, hey, guess what? They are not amazing, but in some cases I prefer some over the other. Like Est is actually fairly solid if you go for a sturdy impact set, for example. And also is a very easy to build unit. I'll get back to that once we get to her, but you know, then you have a higher ceiling with Norson. The only unit that I'd say is kind of unfortunate is Idun, but she has a good duo skill that makes her actually worth pulling for. Anyway, let's talk about the units themselves, shall we? First off is Norson, which is our 4-star focus, which has a rate of like 10% to be pulled. I just want to point that out because, yeah, those rates are actually insane. That fork is also really good. The only issue I have with it is the fact that it's attack and death. This is even more worth mentioning for swords. When we'll get to Bartray, but as far as Lance that kind of want to have defense, there's not a whole lot of them. Most Lance unit we have a buttload of defense and not enough res. Looking at Lucas. Looking at you, Lucas, again. Looking at you, Ephraim. Looking at you, like, literally any unit out there. There is so many Lance units that have no res but a lot of defense. The other way around happens sometimes, but it's actually pretty rare. I guess units like Florina can actually make full use of this weapon pretty easily. and Claire as well if you want to have a more all-rounder weapon, as, you know, Armor Killer is cool and all, but if you don't fight armored units, it's not good no more. So, yeah. A bit disappointing that it's Attack in Def, but still Attack in Def has its use, and it does make him really good for one thing, and that's the fact that with 37 defense, good speed, good attack, access to Guild Fork, and, you know, just slap Bonfire on him, you can deal with any Altina you deal with in Arena for very cheap. All you need to do is give him Bonfire, which is pretty helpful to him. Chill speed is cool and all, not really worth honoring him for. His Lance is just so much more relevant overall than this. But yeah, overall, I'd say it's a unit that you might want to pull 1 or 2 off if you plan on building a Lance unit in the future, or expect a Lance unit in the future that you want to build. I myself pulled for a copy or 2. I took one for Finn, and another one is going to be for Dimitri, most likely. Just in case his pref is not up to par. And potentially somebody else, I don't know. Norson has just really good fodder as far as his weapon goes. As far as comparison goes, well, here we go. Yeah. If you go Attack Plus with Norson, he ends up having more def, more speed, more attack, more HP than Eve, but he's behind in res. Personally, I feel like if you're going to go for plus 10, Norson prefers res plus, but you'll see why in the future. Still, while I do say that, Attack Plus is also a fairly good option. Again, very good unit as a one-off for Arena, just in case you have to deal with Altina. But other than this, you must have seen also that I have, you know, Tsubaki here. The reason why Tsubaki is on there is just very obvious. He has a really good pref. If you're comparing Slaying to Eve, do keep in mind he has an extra 3 points across the board, so he ends up with, you know, 8 more defense, 1 more res, 2 more speed, almost the same health, and is only behind by 6 attack. But the thing is, you can just combo this into Brazen very easily to make up for it, while also boosting your res up to 43, and your attack is completely fixed. Eve does have one advantage, and that's the fact that if you go Brazen Attack Res plus Distinct Counter, you still have 38-38. Tsubaki, as far as his res is concerned, while he can hit 46-46, if you want to have even attack and even defense and res, it does require you to have double brazen attack res. Still, Distinct Counter brazen attack res is still very much an option on Tsubaki, and he still ends up having better stats overall than Eve. The Golden Naginata is a very slept-on weapon. The only thing that he's behind off is attack. But it's not like you can't combo him into Brave Lucina for instant proc bonfires to make up for it, for example. And Tsubaki does not cost grails. That's the biggest factor here. Tsubaki is a 3 to 4 star unit, always in the pool, very decent unit overall, and even if you compare him to Norson, yes, he is behind in attack. That is a fair point. But at the end of the day, you know, it's not that much of a difference because of special. That said, Norson does not need to be babysitted, and that's one of the reasons why he's actually pretty good to work with. Because Tsubaki does need a bit of support from Brave Lucina if you want him to be consistent at killing his foes. Something that Norson can do by himself. Norson kind of falls into the jack-of-all-trade category, a bit similar to what Conrad did. It's just that instead of base Conrad and the way that his speed was the dump stat, the dump stat here is res. So, yeah. Definitely worth mentioning. I have 6 built to showcase for Norson, so, yeah. Obviously, again, He's a jack of all trade. You can do way more than these 6 builds, but these are the ones I would do personally. Oh, and if you're curious about what's my thoughts about him and his stat line, I do think, as far as Lance units are concerned, if you're looking at Lance flyers in a vacuum with just stats in mind, Norson is by far the best unit of the game as far as Lance flyer goes. Now, while I say this, the problem is that there's a lot of unit with prefs, and prefs gives people an edge over other units, like Tsubasa has an insane pref. So, of course, stats are not everything. Still, easy, very easy to plus 10 option. I think I calc thing as around 500 to 550 orbs to plus 10 M on average. Keep in mind this is an average and you could be unlucky. I myself have gotten 4 copies and 150 orbs, I think, while also pulling the rest of the banner with him, somehow. But, you know, not everyone's gonna be lucky, and honestly that was the one time I was lucky on, as far as this game was concerned, for the month, so... I mean, at least there was that, right? So yeah, let's talk about builds now. So, okay. I do want to point out another thing. There's one weapon I did not showcase with him, and that's the Brickhorn Lance. If you go with distant counter, instead of flashing carrot, Brickhorn Lance can be a very good option. Because then what you end up with is 47 def and res on enemy phase. So, yeah. I did not mention it because at the end of the day it's the same build as what's shown on screen. The difference is it's just, well, a different weapon. This is one of the best thing about Lance units. We've gotten so many Lance flyers throughout the game that we've gotten so many options for inheritable Lance weapons. And there is a much wider selection for Lance units than there are for anything else. So there's that as an advantage. Anyway, the flashing carrot here, combo with speed res bond allows you to just hit 49 def with 42 res, while also providing your speed to go up to 51. As far as your attack is concerned, well, you're looking at 61 attack, and this can be comboed into Brave Lucina, of course, meaning you can just get hit back, proc Ignis every single time, so long as you double, which should not be too much of a problem at 51 speed. As I said, Brickhorn Lance is an option, so 47 def and res is definitely a thing you can do. Your attack will go down to 59 and your speed down to 49, however. Flashing Carrot is overall a really slept on weapon, and I do wish a lot of people would actually start using it. The second set is definitely a lot better with Flashing Carrot than it is with Brickhorn Lance because you're using attack res bond. Another thing to mention is that for either of these sets, Mystic Boost is an option if you'd rather have being able to fight for several rounds, because Brave Lucina requires you to be hit first, meaning you need to be always on the defensive, meaning you'll typically take damage at the start of every fight. But Mystic Boost allows you to keep your HP high as a result. Another option you can use instead of Mystic Boost if you think your bulk is going to be good enough regardless is to use Aerobatics, because that allows you to just move in range of any unit within 2 space while staying stuck to a unit, which means that you will always have the bond effect up while having extra range to do damage with. This is something that's worth mentioning about any flyer of this game. Aerobatics and bonds just combos well, like very well in general. But yeah, moving on to the second set. This one is a lot more aerobatics friendly. The other sets here, you're working with 4 cooldown. Here you're working with slaying Lance, which means with Slaying Lance, especially the one on the left, you end up with 47 def, 47 res, right? Yeah, with also 66 attack and 49 speed. And you get hit, proc Bonfire because of the Slaying Lance. This is extremely helpful in finishing off your foes. This is probably the best set if you want to just have overall uses without being reliant on anybody or any support whatsoever. You basically just need a stepping stone to teleport to with aerobatics, and there you go. And to the right is with Guild Fork. After all, if you're going to use bonds, Guild Fork has a very similar condition and also makes you immune to attack and def debuffs, which is pretty helpful considering his attack is rather solid. With attack res bond 4, I should precise, you're basically looking at 71 attack at plus 10, as well as 49 speed. Pretty solid overall, but you also get an extra 5 def, meaning you end up with 52 defense, meaning Bonfire procs for 26 damage. Another thing to note is that you still have 47 res with all that. Guild Fork is a very good weapon. It makes me kind of laugh when you look at, what's his face again? Oh yeah, Shiro and his breath, and you look at Guild Fork next to it. It's just a better version of what Shiro has. But hey, you should not get a refine. Old one needs to have one first. What? Anyway, let's move on to the last bit of sets. So, the set on the left is very obvious and self-explanatory. This is a set with Fury, Desperation, and Gale Force with Heavy Blade. Just hit twice, proc Gale Force, go up again. You're looking at 66-48 offensively, so obviously that's not going to be too much of a problem. And you're still bulky defensively. 51 defense and 36 res is no slouch. You can also use Life and Death 4, but Fury 4 is a bit better considering, first off, it sets you up in Desperation in two fights. 2, it doesn't neutralizes your bulk, which means if you are still high enough on HP, you can tank on enemy phase sometimes if required, which makes you a bit safer overall. Also, Life and Death 4 will potentially make you one-shot more enemies, and if you one-shot them, you're not proccing anything, so also worth mentioning. To the right is basically the same concept, except it's with Bonfire. You hit and then you proc Bonfire. These are the most practical sets and can be definitely used well with Fury 3. Even on low merges. So yeah. Moving on to Idun. Yes, Idun. Idun is... well, I'm not gonna mince word here. I believe we have right now 3 red armored dragon, base Idun, Halloween Myr, and this Idun. And this Idun, I'd say, is the worst of the 3. There's no way for her to use Special Fighter effectively if you want to use this encounter with her. She is too slow. Base Idun has the same speed, but the way our weapon worked was basically immunity to debuff, which we've already talked about it being amazing. And it's not a conditional, it's just I'm immune to debuff, period. If I get hit by a debuff, I even get buffed for it. This effect, while easier to proc than the 4 across the board in Idun, which is not that hard considering even if she loses 1 health, she has it up. You can have it on at all time as long as you use, someone within 2 space. It gets rid of debuff, but if she's isolated, then, well, debuffs will be able to work against you. Unless you have a buff, but, that's worth mentioning still. Because, if you say smite her in with, Link's skill to give her a buff, after that enemy phase, she's kind of just dead on her track, and that's kind of a problem. It's a bit unwieldy, and honestly, the fact that she, you know, it neutralizes the unit's penalty and inflicts attack -6. Also blocks follow-up. If there was not the block follow-up, it would be just straight up worse than Basic Dune. But the fact that it blocks follow-ups can allow her to run something different than Special Fighter to some extent, without requiring a speed stat, which makes it somewhat okay until you kind of realize that Quick Riposte is not really a high HP requirement. Like 80% plus HP is not amazing. And a bit yikes in a way. So overall, it's a bit iffy. Halloween Mer also has a really good weapon. Essentially, if she has 5 more dev than you, she can just, you know, get a follow-up. Comboed into Quick Riposte, you can have special, you know, special counter? What? Special fighter with this. And that's one of the problem with Idun. Well, I guess we'll get to it once we get to it. As for the rest of her kit, Sturdy Stances, you know, it's okay. Can be helpful in certain cases. Actually, is probably... No. I was going to say something that I wish Shannon came with, but it's actually Mirror Stance 3 that I kind of wish he came with instead of Speed Def, of all things. But yeah, moving to comparison, there is no surprise that we're here. They're basically very, very, very similar. You can make the case that this Idun has a better stat line than Idun, the base one. That would be correct. However, it doesn't mean much at the end of the day because, you know, the thing with base Idun is that you can actually get extra speed from her weapon, and the extra speed does wonder for her. So, yeah. Idun's Pref basically gives 4 across the board, makes her immune to debuff. The condition for the 4 across the board is to get hit by a debuff or have less than full HP, which is very easy to work with. Does not require to be babysitted whatsoever or have anyone around you. Does not make you weak to lunge, which is something that this Idun can struggle with. If you get hit by something with Fire Sweep, first off, you have no way to hit back. Armored units have just no option whatsoever to deal with that. They just take it like a bitch. Fire Sweep Lunge will get you out of your ally, and suddenly your weapon is dead. And the fact that your weapon is dead kind of spells death for you. Because if your weapon's dead, all you have is a 16 might beat stick with 3 res. Well, I say that, but you can still have a buff up to make up for it. But then, on your next turn, you're probably going to be stuck between enemies and yourself, and you won't be able to get to the unit in time to buff it, unless you have another link skill with a 3 movement smite unit or something. It's just overall very shaky. The condition is definitely could be better, and yeah. Still, when it works, it's actually fairly decent. I'm not trying to talk it down like it's the worst thing in the existence of everything. It's just that the 4-speed Idun gets from her weapon is what makes the difference between being able to run special fighter and not being able to run special fighter. Here's why it's important. We'll talk to the set of the right first, because that's the set with Distant Counter. If you want to use Distant Counter, you kind of have to stick with this set, regardless of your merge. Even if you're plus 10, even if you have all the flowers, you just do not have enough speed. Even if you have all the flowers, Darting Stance, which limits you to enemy phase, you're still only at 43 speed, which means you need outside help to function. This is not a problem for base Idun, and that's one of the reasons that makes her so good. Well, actually, it's more like if you go speed plus, with flowers, you'd have 40, so with Darting Stance, you'd be 46. You'd be 1 point off of what I consider the premier number, and you'd start missing a good chunk of, you know, double back, which makes it a bit iffy overall. Whereas Base Idun would hit 50 speed with the Speed Plus, which is a lot less shaky than 46. And that's with Darting Stance. Keep in mind, you have other options like Speed Res Bond, for example. So Base Idun can definitely use Special Fighter to a much, much better option. Bolt Fighter Quick Repose. Here's the problem you have with this compared to, say, Halloween Myrrh. Halloween Myrrh, the thing is, as long as she has 5 more defense than you, will be able to double you, and Quick Repose will be able to function for enemy phase, because you need to be on player phase to get the follow-up if you have 5 more defense. So what you can do is combo those 2 skills with Special Fighter, which means your enemy is unable to use specials. This Idun is still very weak to specials, and also being isolated. And another thing with H-Myrrh is that she also gets the cooldown increase on both player phase and enemy phase. This is the main thing. Here, if you look at the set with Zephyr Breath, you basically have Bolt Fighter proccing Bonfire every time. What happens on enemy phase? You get hit, you hit back, you hope to get doubled, but your speed is kind of at this awkward spot where your foe might not be able to always double you. And if he doesn't double you, then you don't get to proc Bonfire. It's just awkward, I guess is the best way to put it, unless you just remove the speed buff, and even then, 30 speed can block some follow-up. Not to mention, our weapon blocks follow-ups. So, more often than not, what will end up happening is just you get hit, you hit back, you get, you get hit, you hit back again, Bonfire did not proc. At least it's going to be ready for another fight, but if you have to kill the foe right there, that's kind of a problem. That said, you end up being extremely bulky, looking at around 57 def and res, and if you attack deploy the enemy or attack smoke them, both of them are good options, you end up with even better bulk, sitting at 62-62 or 64-64 respectively. It's pretty solid. The problem is just how you may miss kills purely because of the way you won't be able to proc Bonfire on enemy phase. So you have another choice, and it's instead of Bolt Fighter Quick Repose to just give up completely on having a player phase altogether and just run Vengeful Fighter. It's not ideal, but it's an option. It's really not ideal, but it's an option. And then just hope that you have enough speed to double on player phase if needed. Again, not really ideal, and armored units are clunky by nature, so limiting them away from options such as, Special Fighter is not doing them any favor. Set on the left is just very simple. It's just a more damage-oriented set. Steady Posture gives you 6 def, so there's no point in going def plus at that point. You end up with 53 def and 51 res, as well as 48 speed. It's pretty solid at that point. And your attack stays at 66. You're immune to debuff as long as the conditions are fulfilled. But yeah, overall it's kind of iffy. If you have to deal with ranged units, well, you're just basically sitting there and you just take it, basically. There's nothing you can really do about it. You're just going to get hit by it. But hey, I mean, that's what it is. Another thing to mention though is the fact that if you get hit by something like chill res, and then you get hit by an AoE, the weapon won't save you from that. You're still going to have the -7 res before the AoE. So if you have to deal with something like Familial, there's nothing you're going to be doing too well. You should just not try. Which makes me wish he was green. Or blue. Not red. But hey, that's just me. That's just me. Or colorless. Colorless could have been also an option. It's not like we haven't had dragons that have changed colors. I mean, Tiki is blue, red, and colorless at this point. Also green if you count the first summer Tiki, but that's not a dragon. But yeah. Moving on to Est. Now Est is a very good budget unit. And I do recommend that if you're thinking of really like bolstering your teams for AA, you take a copy of her. For the simple reason that she comes with Fury 4 and she comes with Own Flyers. The chill skill don't matter, but Own Flyers and Fury 4, all it means is that you need to have Desperation and a Blade Tome. Both skills are available at 3 to 4 star, and she's going to be very solid in Arena Assault to deal with those reds, as long as you have a Blade Tome. And her stat line is honestly the best as far as Blade Tomes are concerned. So, yeah, very, very, very good unit to have as a one-off. IVs won't even matter unless you get Def minus or HP minus. Those are the two Bane that kind of hurt you because you kind of want to have more bulk. But other than that, it's pretty solid. So, let's talk about comparison. As far as comparisons are concerned, there's not a whole lot you can make here. There's Legiarn and then there's Morgan. Now, Morgan's a bit of a weird comparison to make. I know that for a fact. But while I do make the comparison, I do want to point out one thing, and that's the fact that they have similar pref in terms of buffs. Est's pref, God, that's hard to pronounce. Her pref essentially gives 5 across the board as long as you have someone within 2 space and makes you immune to debuffs as well. That's pretty solid. Now, as far as Morgan's weapon is concerned, if she has more res than the enemy, she gets 4 across the board. But she also gets 3 attack and speed if there is an ally within 2 space. So, she ends up having a better boost in attack and speed, a lesser one in def and res, but is also able to ploy, something Est can't do. That said, the fact that Est also gets 5 across the board kind of just means that, well, the fact that Morgan gets 7/7 to attack and speed doesn't matter as much. You still end up with 2 attack and 3 speed, I believe. Yeah, 2 attack and 3 speed over Morgan. The def and res, you end up with 2 more defense than Morgan, 2 more HP than Morgan. The only stat you're behind is res. Morgan, however, is also able to support her teammates, which is actually one of the things that S can do, and she can ploy, something that S cannot do. So Morgan is a bit more of a team player while also being able to do somewhat similarly in the attack phase, or rather, when compared to do damage, I guess. It's hard to mention, but yeah, I think you understand what I mean. As far as Legiarn's concerned, she gets a Forseti effect, and I think that was basically all what her weapon did, which can be helpful here or there, but Reinhardt kind of exists, and now we have low skills, which she doesn't have access to, so yeah, that niche is kind of not great anymore. At least that's how I feel. Still, overall, Est is pretty solid. Morgan is also pretty solid. It really depends on your playstyle. If your other units need buffs, you'd rather use Morgan over Est. If your other allies are fine without the buffs, then Est is probably a better option. Though, as I said, she's a very good one-off option with just Fury Desperation Blade Tome, because she hits insane amount of attacks. Even if you are very low merge, she is very solid at the roll. So let's talk about builds. Set on the left is with Sturdy Impact, of course. With this one, she hits 80 attack as well as 50 speed. Yeah, even without a Blade Tome, she can hit pretty hard and also has added mobility. I guess she's kind of similar in a way to Julia, except unlike Julia, she actually has a weapon that buffs speed. and and on top of it, makes you immune to debuff, which I guess is basically Julia but on steroids. Just think light and dark, the nullifying buff effect of light and dark, fused up with her weapon on top of buffing speed and defense, which are stat that, you know, Julia kind of wish she had as a buff, while also being flyer, while also having access to mobility. Yeah, Est is a bit more dangerous than Julia, I feel like, because she hits hard and she can double very easily. And also, you know, Sturdy Impact is actually much more warranted on Est than it is on Julia. With that aside, with this set, she ends up with, you know, 41 def, 42 def, 41 res, which makes her also able to take a hit. So 80, 50, 42, 41 with 43 health. I don't think I have to explain why this is good. At that point, the enemy cannot do follow-ups. They would need to have something like Vengeful Fighter on top of 55 plus speed. And you cannot debuff her either. The only thing you can do is really use lulls, and that's about it, really. Which makes her very dangerous. Even if you debuff her, like, remove all the buffs she may get, she is still dangerous. Like, even without buffs here, she hits 75 attack with 44 speed. Also, you know, 31 def and 30 res. Actually, 36, 35. She's really frustrating to take down. Unless you have a bow unit, of course. She hits hard. Like, very hard to just avoid getting killed. 75 attack. 74 attack, my bad. 74 attack is still no slouch. So, yeah. Set on the right is with, obviously, Close Counter using Mystic Boost, because you don't really have access to lull skills as a flyer. Mystic Boost allows you to at least heal yourself over time every fight. With Def Plus and Attack Def Bond, you hit 40 defense and 41 res, which is pretty decent overall. And also, you know, immunity to debuff, as I mentioned earlier. 75 attack, 50 speed. Overall, fairly solid. You can also decide to just go full damage dealer with Vantage. I don't really recommend it. 75 attack is good and can definitely work with Vantage. But I do feel like, ideally, you're just better off with Mystic Boost and just keep your HP high. On lower merges, I think Vantage might have a bit more of a use because you won't have as much bulk to work with. But if you're talking about high merges, Mystic Boost all the way. And the last build is, with no surprise, a Blade Tome set. I wanted to showcase this just so you guys understand just how destructive this is. Because with this, she hits 35 def and 40 res, right? 49 speed, which is pretty speedy. And as far as attack is concerned, 97 attack. Death Blow 3 is also a seal. If you think your damage is not good enough, you can jump up to 99 attack, which is the cap, by the way. So, yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Really good one-off. If you get a one-off, I would say Speed Plus is probably the way to go. Because with Speed Plus, you get 4 speed. and your speed is a bit shaky if you go out of her Pref to Blade Tome. On low merges, on high merges, attack plus is king. Always has been, especially, I think it's +5 or higher that you want, no, +4 or higher, that you want to have that you want to have attack plus over speed plus. But yeah, overall, very, very solid unit. And I can already tell she's going to be heavily slept on, despite being able to hit so hard. Like I said, very good AA unit to have. Now, moving on to Fur. The unit was meant to be a sword unit, but is instead an axe unit for literally no reason. Except, I guess, sharing focus with Idun, even though they could have just changed the color of Idun to a different color, but... Moving on. So, the Bun-Bun baton. I guess they want to pass this sword as a mace. Sure, bud. But this weapon is kind of the main problem I have with her. The reason why she's so high on the list is purely because, well, you want to know how many axe flyers we have? We have less axe flyers than we have lance infantries. We have 11. And 3 of them are the same unit. 3 of them are just Shershi, but again, Shershi, Jerome, and R. So in reality, we really only have 9. And you want to know the last speedy axe unit we have that was flying? Minerva? Or the last good one anyway. I don't remember any fast axe flyer unit, actually. At least it's not as bad as axe calves. I think we're still in the single digit for those, but I mean, yeah, this is not great. The weapon she has is effectively just cooldown -1, effective on armors, kills armor skills, because that's what no follow-up does. It's good for other units too, but it's really mostly there for armored units. This makes her a good one-off, yet again. In general, this banner is a good one-off for at least something. Except if your name is Idun. Though I forgot to mention, but Idun's duo skill is actually really solid for AR. If you're dealing with dragons and armors, I hate how I keep forgetting talking about duo skills. But yes, in AR, her skill is very fantastic because you can combo this into, say, Fallen Korin, or say Fallen Tiki, or Legendary Tiki, and then you're suddenly able to take hits you should not be able to take. This gives you a lot of help. So, very good for a map opener in AR. That's really the main reason you kind of want a one-off of her. Fur is a good one-off for armors in AA. Winter Sophis. Norson is a good one-off for Altina. Counters in Arena. And Est is a good one-off in general, but mostly in AA. So yeah. They're all good as a one-off, which is, I think, the first time in any banner history where all 4 of them are good to pull for something. Fur's weapon is a bit niche at first, however, because all it does is deal with armors. You don't deal with that many armors in Arena anymore. To some extent. You still deal with armored units. It's just that they are way more frequent now because of duo heroes. Ephraim scores 185 BST, so as a result, you can expect to see him more than any armored units except Winter Sophis. Same thing with any duo hero ever. So there's too many armored units as a result. Because there's too many armored units, well, Or rather, there's not enough armored units. My bad. And therefore, the weapon can be a bit iffy. There is another thing you can do with the weapon that's actually extremely helpful for Fur, but I'm gonna wait for the builds for that. The rest of our kit is very self-explanatory. I do want to point out one thing, however. If you're dealing with a +10 Winter Sophis, Dev buffed, steady posture 2 as the seal, if you run something like Swift Sparrow, attack speed solo, or weapon, and a buff in attack, you will one-shot this regardless of merges. Attack minus will screw you over, however, but as long as she does not have a buff on, you'll still be able to one-shot. This is worth mentioning because that's the only armored unit that's actually very dangerous and common that has a speed stat to prevent her from doubling. And this is how, folks, this is how you use an actual mass duel simulator. You don't use the absolute garbage list of units and just go, oh, hey, I killed most of them, therefore the unit good. Yes? No. You pit the unit against specific dangerous unit, stack the odds in their favor, not yours, in their favor, and then see how much you need to do to be able to kill the unit. This is something a lot of people misunderstand about duel simulators. And they just go like, oh well, list of unit, I kill most of them, then unit good, yes? Of course, if you stack odds in your favor, you're going to be winning a lot. I mean, literally any unit early on in the game could end up with literally a win rate of beating the entire game, basically, if you actually stack the odds enough in their favor. That doesn't mean it's going to be a helpful help. At the end of the day, if you're going to deal with something like, oh, say, AA, and then the enemy has a death buff, but you calculated them to never have a buff, and then suddenly you fail to get the kill, then the information you just gathered was fucking useless. I'm just pointing this out right now because it does happen sometimes that people just point out like, oh, my unit does so good on the mass duel simulator. I guess that means Jay was wrong and that unit is indeed absolutely broken. And then you just see like all the buffs the unit have and you're like, yeah, okay, no. And then you see the other side never having any buff. I'm just like, that's great, darling. Keep up the good work, I guess. Anyway, rants aside, as far as comparison goes, the only comparison you can really make is Minerva. Now, I do want to stress this. Fur's weapon is not that great. Okay, Fur's weapon is kind of a problem because what you run into is the fact where your weapon only works against a select few units. And if you're not dealing with this select few unit, all you get is a cooldown -1 axe. You get to a point where a slaying axe refined to res would be a better weapon. That's bad. That's awful. Especially considering the unit you're being compared to has a slaying pref that also has Wadao, which is by default better than a slaying weapon that has nothing else. So this is worth mentioning because as a result, Minerva can be better at dealing damage overall than Fur, right? Because Minerva ends up having the 10 damage from special. This comboed with Bonfire, for instance, with Brave Lucina support, can make Minerva a better overall damage dealer than Fur. Fur will be a better unit specialized to deal with armored units, but Minerva would be a better generalist unit. Well, that is until you realize a few things, but that's still worth mentioning. Honestly, I wanted to make a +10 Faithful Axe Minerva for a while, but that kind of fell through when we ended up getting a banner with both Naga Nagi and Nyla. So I was like, well, can't really save for this anymore. I might still go for it, since we get another Faithful Axe from Compile Manual. But that's a story for another time. Either way, I do think Fur is a fairly decent unit. I will just say that she's a bit more specific than Minerva. That said, there is one thing you can do with her. Now, first off, let's talk about the sets themselves. These are the sets that are meant to be against armored units. Gale Force more or less, but it allows you, if you just have a Dancer, for example, you can one-shot one, then one-shot another. Unless they're bulky enough to take 2 hits, then you're just gonna proc it off from one fight. So this is an option. Attack Rest Solo is so you have also an enemy phase in case of. Death Blow 4 can also be an option. If you really want to make sure that the enemy is dead, you can just go Death Blow 7, since now that's an option. But I don't really recommend it personally. Set on the left allows you to hit 70, 51, 38, 40. Actually, 42, 40, sorry. Let me redo this. 74, 51, 42, 40. There you go. Which is pretty solid overall. And at that point, you'll typically one-shot the unit. The thing that's nice about her weapon is if she has to deal with anything with Wary Fighter, which is fairly frequent nowadays in Arena, even now that the cheerleader meta is over, for some bizarre reason. I honestly have no idea why people are still using Wary Fighter on their armors in Arena, but moving on. This breaks that. This ignores Wary Fighter. So that's pretty helpful. This shuts down Bold Fighter, this shuts down Vengeful Fighter. It's just overall a pretty good weapon to deal with armored units. The problem is that it's really just for armored units, because the type of unit that will block your follow-up and get an extra follow-up are typically armored units. There are some units that will make the fact that, she just, block any skills like blocking follow-ups, looking at you, Idun. Well, not really Idun, more like Leaf. I believe he blocks follow-up with, no, he gets a guaranteed follow-up with his sword. I think he also blocks follow-up with his B skill. I'm not sure on the second part, though. Still, that's basically shutdown, for example. This is pretty solid here and there, but it's mostly against armored units that it's going to be solid. So, yeah. It's overall a pretty good weapon in that vacuum. But if you take it out of that vacuum, then you kind of have to go with a set more like the set on the right here. This is a Wind Sweep set. In case you don't know, if you use Wind Sweep, because of her weapon, she's unaffected by Wind Sweep. No follow-up basically has this funny little perk of working on both her enemies and herself. So, that means if you have a B skill that would prevent you from having a follow-up, like Wind Sweep, you'd be able to have a follow-up regardless, through it. This is very helpful because it basically allows her to just go in and just do damage without having any fear of retaliation. As long as the enemy has a 50 or less speed, which, let's be fair, should be pretty common. And if they have more speed, typically it's something like Winter Sophist, which she one-shots anyway, as I mentioned earlier. So, yeah. With Death Blow 7 here, you end up with 78 attack, meaning anything that has 46 speed has to contend with all of that attack twice. If you feel, for some bizarre reason, that your speed is not good enough, Swift Sparrow 3 is still an option. So yeah, pretty solid. Set on the left is with Faithful Axe, which is a bit similar to what I wanted to do with Minerva. Essentially, this set would allow you to hit 43 def and 47 res. Do keep in mind, actually, no, it's 46 def and 48 res, my bad. essentially, Faithful Axe and Bonds are going to be very solid, and as I said before, Aerobatics is also an option, though Mystic Boost is a better option here, because this is ideally with Brave Lucina. Otherwise, you kind of prefer to have Moonbow instead of Ignis. Also, you know, dealing with multiple fights in a row is pretty good. Another thing to mention is the fact that with Faithful Axe, you will also have a boost to speed and attack. So you're basically looking at 75 attack with 55 speed, which is pretty solid overall. So, yeah. The idea is just a multi-phase tank. Keep in mind though, as I said, Minerva will have a better overall weapon. But Bun-Bun does work, it's just very situational. Which makes her good as a one-off, not so much as a, I must merge this unit up. Because the merges won't really do a whole lot for her. Even at low merges, she's gonna have enough speed. Anyway. Like I said, this is very similar to the set I had with Faithful Axe, this time with Bun-Bun Baton, if you'd rather keep the Armor Killer ability with Callout -1. So, yeah. Not much else to say here. Overall, I'd say this was probably the best spring banner we've ever had. Really don't like how Foul looks in that, but other than that, the outfits are not absolutely garbage, which is a step up. Outside of the bottom of first outfit, I don't like that either. But one thing to note, I really like the change of artist for Est. Est actually kind of looks like herself now, instead of looking like a Moe blob that does not have any room in this game, which is kind of nice. But yeah, this banner was a nice surprise. I kind of was like snooze fest from the get-go just because I hate spring. Well, not the season. I hate spring gachas. These outfits have never looked good whatsoever to me. It just feels really off to me. Very off-putting in some cases. Like, Foul looks very off-putting to me. But most of these are actually semi-decent. I like Idun's outfit, I like Est's outfit, I like Norson's outfit, which is kind of nice. It's a nice change of pace from all of the other springtime where, ugh, like Kigero. Oh, look at me, I'm sex appeal, but it looks fucking awful because it just looks like she has big tits for no reason. And then that got dialed back up in Halloween, where she ended up having an ult that looked infinitely better than the spring ult. Camilla looks very off-putting as well. I don't know why, she just looks very off to me. But yeah, this wasn't bad. The selection of characters was also kind of decent. Seeing FE6 getting its first real banner, more or less, because it's like FE6 plus S this year, because gotta finish the trio, was kind of nice as well. And our first non-Lord duo hero was also kind of nice. It's a good combo. I just wish that Foul was not in this absolutely disgusting looking outfit. But yeah, pretty happy with the way it went. So yeah, with that said, I suppose I should call it a video here before I keep tripping on my words some more. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in a day or two for the GHB Tempest Trial tier list update. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone, and stay safe.